The wire fence glistened with morning dew. Boots sank into wet grass. A young German woman stood still with her hands clenched, waiting for pain. She had been told what captivity meant, shouting blows, humiliation. Instead, she heard a calm voice, English, measured, almost polite. A guard gestured toward a mess line. No rifle, but struck her back. No curse followed her steps. Steam rose from tin cups filled with coffee. The smell was unfamiliar, rich, almost comforting. Around her, other women glanced up in confusion. Some flinched at every movement. Others stared, trying to understand the silence. This was not what they had prepared for. This was not what they had been warned about. For many German women taken prisoner in 1945, the shock of American captivity did not come from violence. It came from restraint. By early 1945, Nazi Germany was collapsing under pressure from all sides. The Red Army crossed the Oder River in January and stood less than 70 kilometers from Berlin. In the West, American, British, and Canadian forces pushed across the Rhine in March. Cities lay in ruins. Railways were shattered. Fuel was scarce. Food rationing had reached critical levels. Total war consumed civilian life and erased any clear line between front and home. German women were no longer confined to factories and hospitals. They served as clerks, radio operators, anti-aircraft auxiliaries, and medical staff. The Helferinnen Corps supported the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe across occupied Europe. By 1944, thousands wore uniforms without combat roles. Many were stationed near command centers, air defense units, and supply depots. As Allied forces advanced, entire German units collapsed. Orders became fragmented. Commanders fled or surrendered. Women attached to military units often had no evacuation plans. Some burned documents. Others tried to escape westward, fearing Soviet capture above all else. Roads filled with refugees. Control dissolved. American doctrine toward prisoners of war followed the Geneva Convention of 1929. The United States had ratified it and trained its forces accordingly. Prisoners were to be disarmed, searched, registered, fed, and moved to temporary enclosures. Abuse was prohibited. Retaliation was discouraged. The policy was practical as much as moral. Millions of Axis prisoners would need to be managed quickly and efficiently. Between March and May 1945, American forces captured more than 3 million German soldiers and auxiliaries. Among them were thousands of women. Most had never seen an American soldier before. Their expectations were shaped by years of Nazi propaganda. Posters and radio broadcasts described Allied troops as brutal occupiers. American soldiers were depicted as violent and racially inferior. Female auxiliaries were warned of beatings, imprisonment, and worse. Temporary prisoner enclosures were established along the Rhine and across western Germany. Others were improvised in fields, schools, and former barracks. Conditions were basic. Shelter was limited. Food supplies were strained. Yet systematic physical abuse was not policy. American guards were instructed to keep order and maintain distance. For German women arriving at these camps, fear was immediate. They expected punishment for wearing uniforms. They expected revenge. Instead, many encountered silence, rules, and restraint. This contrast created confusion as much as relief. From the human angle, the experience was disorienting. Most of these women were between 18 and 30 years old. Many had grown up under National Socialist rule since childhood. Authority had always been harsh and absolute. Discipline meant shouting. Power meant fear. Captivity reversed that logic. American guards rarely raised their voices. Orders were short and procedural. Hands were waved, not fists. Women were separated from male prisoners. Medical checks were conducted quickly. Some guards avoided eye contact. Others offered cigarettes or chewing gum. For women who had spent years under ideological control, this restraint felt unreal. Some suspected deception. Others braced for delayed punishment. Several later recalled that kindness itself felt threatening because it disrupted everything they had been taught to expect. From a tactical perspective, restraint made sense. By spring 1945, the war in the West was effectively decided. American units prioritized speed and control. Engaging prisoners violently risked disorder. Units were exhausted and stretched thin. They needed compliance, not resistance. Women prisoners posed little tactical threat. Calm behavior reduced panic and administrative burden. Soft control proved efficient control. Technology and logistics also shaped the experience. American supply systems followed, advancing units closely. Field kitchens operated daily. Medical Corps units treated enemy wounded as required. Standard issue rations were distributed on schedule. This regularity contrasted sharply with late-war German shortages. For prisoners, hot food and basic medical care signaled order and stability. It communicated that survival was expected. From the enemy perspective, the shock was ideological. Nazi doctrine framed enemies as cruel and destructive. The reality of American restraint contradicted years of indoctrination. Some women later described this as the first crack in their belief system. They were not free, they were not liberated, but they were not beaten. That distinction mattered. The defining turning point came during processing and transfer. Capture was only the first stage. Women were registered, photographed, and issued identification numbers. Uniform insignia were removed. Personal items were cataloged. Names were written carefully. Dates of birth verified. Unit affiliations recorded. The process was methodical and impersonal rather than violent. Transportation followed quickly. Trucks and trains moved prisoners to larger holding camps. Movement was tightly controlled. Escapes were rare. Guards maintained distance. Orders were delivered through interpreters when necessary. In several documented cases, American female personnel assisted with searches and medical checks. The scale was immense. By April 1945, American forces held more than 1 million German prisoners. Women formed a small but visible group. Most were processed within weeks. Many were released or transferred to civilian status as demobilization began. The emotional shift unfolded slowly. Shock gave way to exhaustion. Some women slept deeply for the first time in months. Others cried without understanding why. The absence of immediate violence created space for reflection. Not all experiences were positive. Conditions were harsh. Exposure and hunger were real. Uncertainty defined daily life. But the beatings they had expected never came. By summer 1945, most German women prisoners held by American forces were released. They returned to destroyed cities and displaced families. The memory of captivity lingered. For some, American restraint stood in stark contrast to reports from the East, where abuse was widespread. This comparison shaped post-war perceptions and narratives. Strategically, American prisoner policy supported long-term occupation goals. Former prisoners became civilians under Allied control. Early treatment influenced cooperation and stability. Germany had lost millions dead. Its social structure lay in ruins. Women carried much of the burden of rebuilding. The experience of humane captivity did not erase guilt or trauma. It did not absolve responsibility, but it complicated the image of the enemy. It introduced uncertainty into a worldview built on absolutes. For German women who expected beatings, softly spoken guards marked the end of one reality and the beginning of another. Not freedom, not forgiveness, but a moment when fear loosened its grip.